Since Valve released the Steam Deck, I've been craving the same exact experience but plugged into a TV with way better performance to play games at higher resolutions and higher frame rates. And finally, I got it! This thing plays everything either at 4K or at 1440p upscaled to 4K at high details at a smooth 60 FPS with a controller from the comfort of my couch. It's awesome, it's powerful, and it's definitely not worth it compared to a normal gaming console. So let's look at what I picked, at the issues, at the thing it does well, and at why I decided to do this. And also at our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Safing's Portmaster. Portmaster is an all-in-one tool to easily take your privacy to the next level, and it's a tool I use myself on all of my Linux devices. Portmaster lets you automatically block all trackers and malware in every application you run on your computer. Not just your web browser, but everything you run. It's easy to use with defaults already in place that lets you just set it and forget it. But if you like to configure every rule and every app, you also can. Portmaster is completely free and open source, and also free of charge, as it's funded by users that subscribe to the SPN, a super-powered VPN that gives you multiple identities for every connection of every application. So, if you want to easily improve the privacy of your system, whatever the Linux distro you use, or even on Windows, click the link in the description below and download the Portmaster for free. Okay, so what I needed, or what I wanted to be more precise, was the following. I wanted to play my games on my couch, on my 4K TV. I work all day in my office, and at the end of the day, I do not want to play games sitting at the same desk on a mouse and keyboard. I play with a controller, which I find better for most titles, apart from strategy games or competitive FPS. Which I never play anyway, because I don't like this genre, I do not like multiplayer, and I generally suck at it as well. Second, I wanted to run SteamOS, the exact same OS as the Steam Deck, with all the performance tweaks to reduce overhead, the built-in FSR upscaling, the plugins of Decky Loader, and the smooth, excellent controller-friendly experience. And in terms of performance, it needed to match or exceed my PS5. So these are very specific prerequisites, and you might not agree with them, and that's okay if you think they're dumb. They're my own subjective wants and needs. And okay, I will say it outright, what I ended up with is not console-sized. This is a PC. It's a relatively small PC, but it's still a big PC, even compared to the enormous PS5. And sure, I could have found a mini ITX case and build my PC from that, but it's honestly such a pain to slot everything in, and the cooling headroom is so small that you're probably going to leave performance on the table. And upgradability might be limited, because you just don't have that much space to put a bigger anything in. So I went for a Micro ATX, which means that yes, it does not look like a console, but it was easy to install the GPU, it has ample room for cooling, and it sort of fits in my TV cabinet, so who cares? So yeah, it's a console in its use case, not in its form factor. It's still better looking than a PS5, which is the ugliest console I've ever seen in my life. And it's a pre-built. And I know, boo, cut off my head or whatever else, but honestly, hear me out. I know how to build PCs, I just find that extremely tedious and boring. I know some people love doing it, but for me, it's just not worth it. It's not an experience I enjoy. And since I bought this thing with my company, I also saved a lot of money since I didn't pay VAT. So I went for a Tuxedo Cube, because out of all the Linux manufacturers I wanted to support, they were the only ones in a decent price range with a relatively small form factor. And Tuxedo did not sponsor the video, they did not send me this PC for free, they did not give me a discount. I paid for it in full. So let's see what's inside. So here I have an Intel Core i7-12700, because 13th gen gains are limited and they're also more expensive. Ryzen options were also more expensive here. I have 32 gigs of 3200 MHz DDR4 RAM, I have 1TB PCIe 4 SSD with a 750W ultra-silent modular power supply and a Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth card. For the GPU, I didn't get it from Tuxedo directly, because this PC capped out at a Radeon 6600, which felt a tiny bit too weak for my needs. Nvidia options were better, but as I mentioned, Nvidia and SteamOS are not friends, so I really wanted to go Team Red this time. So in the end, this cube came at a bit more than €1,000, and I bought a Radeon 6650 XT online, which cost me €300. The total cost is a bit less than $1,400, which isn't cheap by any means, especially compared to a regular gaming console. The PC was pretty well cable managed out of the box, and installing the GPU was not super easy with the limited space, but it also wasn't too difficult. I only had to unscrew the power supply from the case to be able to plug it in. And then it was time to install the operating system. So, SteamOS is not yet available for any computer, so I went with HoloISO, which is basically exactly like what SteamOS will be when it will be released. And I know someone will ask, why didn't I just go with any distro with Steam in big picture mode? So I'm going to answer that right now. Big picture mode doesn't give you GameScope, the compositor, which comes with the frame rate limiter, the performance metrics with Mango HUD, the native upscaling of any game, or the option for half rate shading, which in some games reduces the GPU load and thus power consumption and thus the noise of the PC. Big picture mode also does not give you access to Decky Loader, which is a fantastic plugin system for Steam Deck that works on HoloISO as well. With it, I improved how the interface looks, I added game music and ProtonDB badges on game pages, so no, big picture mode on any Linux distro would just not have been suitable. Now, HoloISO is non-official, but it builds on all the public sources that Valve released with the Steam Deck, and it's the exact experience I wanted. So I downloaded it, I created the live USB, and I installed it with the built-in installer, just like any other Linux distro. But after that, the problems started. First, the default kernel they pick doesn't work with a lot of hardware. It's the kernel meant for the Steam Deck, and it lacks support for a bunch of things. So I had no Wi-Fi and no Bluetooth support. Fortunately, they also ship with the HoloISO kernel, which is more mainline, and does support a lot more things. You can select it during boot with GRUB. Except that's not practical at all, because even if you select it once, it does not become the default. And Bluetooth controllers don't work in GRUB, so I couldn't even just select it every time I reboot. I had to find a way to make it the default. So I turned to the controversial GRUB Customizer. That's a graphical app that lets you tweak your GRUB boot options. And I say it's controversial because a lot of people say it breaks their bootloader. And even installing this thing was not simple, because HoloISO, like SteamOS, is based on Arch, but they don't really ship a correct pacman config with the correct repos. So I had to manually edit the pacman config to add the necessary repos to it, and then run a full system update followed by the install of GRUB Customizer. And even then, it didn't work. It could not open the GRUB config file. That's because that file is pre-configured with conditions to boot with specific options on specific devices. So I just commented all these conditions, and then GRUB Customizer managed to open the file, and I could finally set the HoloISO kernel as the default boot option. And now I have a fully functional system. Every time I boot, I can just press the power button and it boots inside of SteamOS. It's connected to everything, the Bluetooth controller works, it's awesome. Except all games ran at 720p maximum. I could not change that resolution in-game at all. It was 720p. Of course, a simple web search gave me the answer. It's because SteamOS is meant for the Steam Deck and it defaults to 720p. But you can change all that in the game's properties to select the max resolution you will allow. 4K in my case. Now, in the meantime, before I found this solution, I decided maybe SteamOS was not working, so I tried Chimera OS, but this didn't even connect to my Bluetooth controllers, either a DualSense 5 or an Xbox Series X controller, which both have always worked out of the box immediately on any other distro. So after 1 hour trying to solve that, I went back to HoloISO and never looked back. Okay, so now that I can set the resolution, I can play, but the performance was horrible. I could not manage 1080p 60 in Spider-Man at medium details. Jedi Fallen Order had to run at 768p on medium to even get close to 60 FPS. It was a mess, and this system should have been able to give me a lot more than this. Now, after a few hours of looking online, I found a solution. Turns out some AMD cards on Linux run in low power mode by default and don't move to full power when you need them to. The fix was to change that mode manually in a config file to put the card into 3D full screen mode. Since this did not persist after a reboot, I wrote a little script to perform the change and created a systemd service to auto-start it. So, not really a plug-and-play console experience. I had to tinker quite a lot, but that's okay. HoloISO is not official, there is no official version of SteamOS to turn any PC into a gaming console. So it was okay. It was not easy, but it was not super difficult compared to a lot of other things I had to do on Linux since 2006. Now in terms of updates, you get the exact same updates as the Steam Deck for the Steam Desktop client, for the Steam interface, for Proton. You get them in the same time frame. The mechanism is absolutely identical. But compared to a console, it's not as practical. I cannot turn the PC on by turning the controller on. And when the PC goes to sleep, I can't resume it with the controller. I have to go press the button. It's not exactly difficult, and it makes me move my fat ass, which I guess is not a bad thing either. But how's the performance then? Well, I can play virtually everything at least at 1440p at max settings at a smooth 60 FPS. I've completed a full playthrough of Spider-Man, also running at 1440p high settings, upscaled to 4K through in-game FSR. I've played about 13 hours of Cyberpunk at max details, 1440p upscaled to 4K through the in-game FSR, with sharpness turned to the max. And both these games maintain 60 FPS, no problems, even in Cyberpunk when driving around in the city. I played about a third of Red Dead Redemption 2, also running at 1440p, high settings, upscaled to 4K through HoloISO, at a smooth 60 FPS as well. I finished Stray on this thing, same story. I played The Devil in Me in co-op with my girlfriend, same performance. Horizon Zero Dawn, same performance. If I push native 4K and high settings on recent AAA releases, I can get to 60 FPS and sometimes even maintain it, but there are some drops depending on the game. For example, Spider-Man holds 60 FPS pretty well at 4K high, except in the busiest areas of the city. But Red Dead Redemption 2 is more a 50 FPS experience at that resolution and detail level. A lot of games can actually run at 4K 60 very well, but they do tend to make the PC hotter and noisier. It's not a big issue because I play with a soundbar under my TV, and the sound of the game generally completely overloads the sound of the PC. I generally do not hear it except in very quiet moments, but I do prefer running at 1440p 60 just to make sure that the sound stays as low as possible. I don't hear the fans as much. And so this makes this thing a better performer than my PS5, because PS5 rarely runs AAA games at 4K 60. Generally, if you want 4K high details, you're using quality mode, and so you're running at 30 FPS, not 60. The performance mode on PS5 generally runs games at 1440p and either medium or high details. But of course, my PS5 cost me half the price of that PC with 2 games included, it emits half the noise, and it's half the size. So is it worth it? No. All games I play on this PC I could have played on the PS5 at 60 FPS as well. Maybe the details wouldn't be as high, but it wouldn't have made a huge difference. And cost-wise, it's very expensive for a marginal visual improvement, especially when you consider the PC is huge and noisier than the PS5. And yet, I love it, and I'm gonna play every single game I can on this PC instead of on the PS5. Because it runs Linux, and I love Linux. The PS5 runs something closed source based on BSD, and I don't care about BSD as much as I care about Linux. It also works with an Xbox controller, which I prefer to the DualSense 5. which still gives me cramps after 2 hours and still uses the nonsensical symmetrical stick placement. Also, my games library is mostly on Steam these days. I have games going all the way back to CS 1.6 and Half-Life 2, and they mostly all run on Linux. Now, I can also start a playthrough on my TV, and then pick up my Steam Deck, make sure my saves are synced, and go play on that outside or in bed or on holidays. And if I'm honest, that's the biggest draw. It creates an ecosystem. You get a handheld, and you get a console. And they play the same games with the same saves, the same interface, the same friends list, the same achievements, and the same compatibility. So no, it's not worth it compared to a PS5 or an Xbox Series X, at least financially. But the experience and the integration with the Steam Deck is awesome, and I cannot see myself playing on anything else from now on. So, thanks everyone for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, to write a comment. And if you didn't like it, there's always that thumbs down button, and you can tell me why in the comments as well. And if you really enjoyed the video, you can support the channel. There are plenty of links in the description below for LibraPay, PayPal, Patreon, YouTube memberships, whatever else, you know how this works. So, thanks for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!